Welcome to the Financial Times coverage of the Ambrosetti Forum at the Villa d'Este on the banks of Lake Como in northern Italy. We have with us today Hernando de Soto, who is well known throughout the world for his many publications and advice on the subject of the informal economy. He's been advising governments for several decades on how to address the challenges of the informal economy, and most recently has been in the Middle East talking to heads of state there. He's also president and founder of the Institute for Liberty and Democracy in Peru. Mr. de Soto, thank you very much indeed for talking to us. One of the big themes last year at this forum was how the emerging markets were the only remaining drivers of growth for the global economy. And that was felt, obviously, to be a fantastic thing, given what was happening in the more advanced economies of the US and Europe. This year, certainly in recent weeks, things seem to have turned around a little, and there appears to be far greater volatility and, for example, market turmoil in the emerging markets than in the more advanced markets. Do you think this is a temporary phenomenon, and if so, why?
I think it's temporary because just about everything these last 5 years, since 2008, when the crisis became obvious, every time the news and those who feature in the news change. So if you remember, there's a moment who said, Italy is the worst of them all. And then it came to be Greece, and they said, but you don't know what it looks like compared to Spain. And then it was Spain. And then 5 years ago, we had Hank Paulson, the Secretary of the Treasury, begging for $1 trillion or Wall Street would have crumbled. So it changes for the very simple reason that we don't really have much facts to go on. And so the market plays its game the way it always does. And I think this time it's about emerging markets, but all we need is one piece of bad news coming from the first world, and this will change. The fact is we have very little amount of facts. Facts mean data that's tested for truth, among other things, because we don't know where most of these financial instruments are yet. There's $700 trillion of derivatives floating around. Maybe it's an unfair number. Let's bring it down to 300. Let's bring it down to 200, and we don't know where they are. And we don't know who's really broke and which bank has got the bad paper. So it's bound to get worse in unpredictable terms.
You don't sound as optimistic about economic prospects as perhaps some other commentators at this forum. Do you feel that we are approaching the end of the financial crisis?
No, I do not feel we are at the end of the financial crisis, because I think that the financial crisis is essentially a credit crunch, which means that people are not providing credit. At this moment, it's essentially central banks that are pumping money inside the economy. Credit, which is the ability or the desire of private sector to give credit, not money, credit in whatever form it is to the other parts of the private sector, is a non-existent thing, or very little of it exists. Therefore, it means that Westerners themselves haven't really yet agreed as to what's wrong, because you've got your governments coming in. If my government were out there issuing the money and nobody that's private would be investing in Peru or Latin America, you would have said this is a highly unstable place. I think that's true for the West. I don't think anybody has yet bit the bullet. And the bullet is essentially to find out why the private sector isn't giving as much credit as it was before. Why do they feel somewhere in their bones that it isn't totally ready? I think there's a feeling that monetary theory would indicate that maybe we don't really need facts. It's all a question of faith. But I think that that's where we are today.
If we just turn to another region and another subject, which I know you've been spending a lot of time on recently. I know that you've been advising heads of states and Middle East governments about how to respond to the turmoil of the Arab Spring. And I know that you've thought quite in depth about what challenges need to be addressed. Could you perhaps briefly talk me through what you see the prime challenges as being?
Yes. We've been called in by various political and business leaders in the Middle East and North Africa for some time now, because what my group does is essentially try and find out how many people are operating entrepreneurially, that is to say in enterprises, but not within the law. And not within the law means they have no access to credit, they have no access to capital, they don't have contracts, they don't have property rights, so they're generally much poorer than those who work within the law. And what we've done lately, which I think is very interesting over the last 2.5 years since the Arab Spring began, is we started talking to those who actually sparked it off, who you remember were the martyrs, the self-immolators who lit up. And we found out that it wasn't just one who lit up with lighter fluid on the 17th of December 2010, a man called Mohammed Bouazizi who committed suicide, but it was actually 64 who simultaneously lit up all over the Middle East and North Africa. So what we asked them, those who survived, there's 37 of the 64 who survived, and those who were willing to talk, and the families of those who were deceased, is that what were the reasons? And 3 reasons come out all the time. And we've done this, of course, with Arab researchers, and we've done it with the trade organizations of mostly North Africa. And the reply is always the same 3. They were rebelling against expropriation because they felt that they had been unjustly confiscated by government or powers bigger than they are. The second was economic exclusion. And the third was an Algerian word which sums it up, hogra, which means contempt. So it's essentially a revolution, the Arab Spring, that is in favor of markets, because if you look at all of them, they were all in business, albeit illegally, but all in business. And since they were making statements, because nobody commits suicide lighting themselves up without saying something, they were filmed or they were photographed and there were witnesses. And there wasn't one religious cry about extremism, and there wasn't one political cry. The only thing that we were told, for example, about the first one of them to self-immolate, Mohammed Bouazizi, was that the way his family felt is that he basically thought that the poor also had the right to buy and sell. So as far as we're concerned, it's the coming 200 years after Britain, 300 years after Britain or the United States, of the Industrial Revolution, which means that the collapse of the old ways of production, which just cannot survive competing against mass production. And they're trying to get in and they can't get in.
Mr. de Soto, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you so much.